Hi, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Brain Talks. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. We've been hitting this topic a lot lately, which is the economics around dementia care, how you can navigate the insurance systems, how you prepare and plan for the cost of dementia. Well, I was so happy to be introduced to a documentary called Spent. This documentary follows two people who have been impacted by dementia. They've been diagnosed, and their caregivers, which are their spouses, and really talks about the strain of the economics and managing the economics around care. So we have four guests joining us. I'm so happy to have with us the filmmakers of Spent, the Hidden Cost of Dementia documentary, Robert Ferrier and Daphne Glover. They are the husband and wife filmmakers, I should say. And joining us is also Robyn Wendt. She is featured in the documentary about caring for her husband who sadly passed away. And Mark Behnke, who is also somebody who he's the partner of Robyn now, but also lost his wife to dementia. So thank you all very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Great to see you all.
So let's just start with the production of this documentary. First and foremost, Robert, Daphne, why was this an important documentary for you both to make?
Well, my mom had dementia, and when she was first diagnosed, people were asking us, okay, when are you going to make a documentary about this? And my answer was never, because it was such a painful and close topic for me. But we do a lot in the public health realm. And as we started to go through this process of caring for my mom and figuring out the costs involved with caring for someone with dementia, we were just horrified. And we thought, you know what, as filmmakers, this is really, we hadn't seen anything that talked about that. And we thought we could make a film. And by then I was sort of emotionally ready to do it, that would really speak to that and be able to start a dialogue. And we thought, boy, this is something people really need to know about, so they can be prepared for it. But also people who are in the boat need to be able to know where to go for help and what to do. And so that's kind of, that was the impetus for the idea, was our caring for my mother, Betty.
And, I might add that we, in caring for Daphne's mom, Daphne and her siblings, we were able to pull all our resources together and, supplement Daphne's mom's limited income to pay for the care that she needed. And like all people who suffer from dementia need. When we were doing this, we were thinking to ourselves, gosh, we have a family support group, and we have we were able to, cobble together the resources. But we thought, gosh, there's so many people out there who don't have this support group and do not have the resources. What are they doing? Where are they going? And, when we talk to people, we realize that this is actually something that not many people really talk about, because dementia itself the disease itself is already, some people sort of go into themselves and don't really talk about the actual disease, and then finances on top of that disease make it an extra note, So we thought, let's do this film, get people talking.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things is that we often hear from people in our community is it really creeps up on you. It's not something people usually plan. And coupled with the fact that a diagnosis itself is so shocking and so rocking to people's worlds that I don't think the next natural thing to think about is, how are we going to pay for this? Because actually care evolves, and the further you get into this disease, the more care you need, and it becomes more taxing. So Robyn, tell us a little bit about your husband, how many years he lived with dementia, and I know you talk about the financial impact it had on your family as well.
Yes, most definitely. And I don't want to say that I was in any denial that he had dementia when it was sort of apparent with certain things he was showing, but I just didn't know about dementia at all, never been around it. And it actually took a cousin to tell me that he had it. So we had been living with some of the just the strange things that they tend to do for, I want to say from onset, probably 10 years, 7 years, certainly I knew. So from diagnosis, it was 7 years until he passed. And we were small business owners. We were in the hospitality game in Cape May, New Jersey. We had a small bed and breakfast. And so we were ma and pa. And he was the chef and maintenance god and all things considered. But so the impact, financially was, first of all, us having to step out of those roles and replace ourselves with others, and pay so that they would stay. So, yeah, it was, unfortunately, with one of his symptoms was pretty much trying to run away from himself. And that's when we ended up in Annapolis, moving from our home in New Jersey. We sold. We did okay with that sale, but then we bought on the high end in Maryland. So it just started to snowball from there.
Yeah. And maybe you want to share with us too, Mark, what your circumstances were with your wife at the time, she was diagnosed through the course of the disease.
Well, everybody's got such a unique journey. In my case, my wife, was fairly early onset. Her onset of symptoms were before the age of 50, less than 5 years after I married her. Knowing what I do, we all do, what we've learned about Alzheimer's now, I somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but not entirely, tell people I basically married an Alzheimer's patient. I used to joke that sometimes she could just have her blonde moments, but it turns out that those were maybe some of the earliest signs. and Robyn mentioned not wanting to say she was in denial, but denial is a fairly common thing that most of us, I think, use to cope with a lot of stuff in life. And so as you were describing, when somebody first gets diagnosed, immediately going to the next step and thinking about finances, if you are wanting to hold on to some hope and maybe a cure or treatment or life extension or something, probably one of the last places you want to go is the financial aspect of it, especially when, as you said, Deborah, for the most of us, we're not prepared for it financially. It's going to be absolutely overwhelming. So staying away from that is just, you wake up each day and try to cope with the day, and the last thing you're thinking about is the finances. In my particular case, I had been fortunate enough to sell a business and leave California right before the economic crisis hit. And so I actually thought I was just going to be fly fishing for a couple of years, and then I was going to have to figure out my next chapter in Montana. And little did I know that my next chapter was going to be close to a decade as a caregiver.
Yeah. It is actually astounding. And this is what Spent does a really good job of really making you realize this is an imminent crisis. This is not something that, might not happen in our lifetime. I mean, it's here and it's only going to get worse. I think, this is to either one of you, Robert or Daphne, just uncovering and really highlighting that expense. Like, put that into perspective for us. What are we facing?
Well, gosh, the average cost for caring for a loved one with dementia is around $70,000 a year, and that doesn't include a lot of other, ancillary costs. That's just the care that it takes to get a person through their daily life. And what we found is really, which is unique, it really is a middle class crisis in a way, because if you have the money and the resources, then you can pay for the care, and sure, you're impacted, but it's not, debilitating. And of course, if you're
impacted emotionally,
obviously, but maybe not so much financially. If you are, in the poverty stricken, then there are programs available to you. There's Medicaid that's available. But if you're in the middle class, then Medicare does not pay for any of these care costs. So that's where the middle class is really impacted the most, we found. So it's kind of a
and one of the things we found astonishing, I mean, we live in Annapolis near Washington, D.C., so of course the costs here are probably more expensive than maybe in other places, but it averages here about $10,000 a month. So you're looking at $120,000 a year. And my mom had vascular dementia, so she didn't need care for as many years. But if you're talking about 10 years or more, that's a lot. I mean, you'd have to be very wealthy to still support another household where the rest of the family is living. It's just overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And also the fact that, there's a lot more people getting diagnosed younger, and we don't know whether that's just because we're getting better at diagnosing it or, if environmental reasons, whatever. But the fact of the matter is, if you take a two household earning incomes and you reduce it to one, there's an impact. Full stop. There's you've lost, half of your income that's generating wealth, savings, etc. So, I mean, maybe you could shed some light on this for us, either Robyn or Mark. How did you plan, or did you plan, once you had diagnosis? Like, did the savings dwindle? I mean, you mentioned, Robyn, and I see you kind of chuckling because you were both working side by side for a small bed and breakfast type business, and that could no longer be sustained. So what happens next?
So Wolfgang had his meager Social Security. I did take a small salary. Toward the end, I had to stop taking any money out of the inn because not being there as the primary owner or, running it myself, being able to have hands-on, I did lose a little ground. My manager and our chef were diligent, but it wasn't, therefore, you know what I mean? It's just a really hard nut to crack. But they did look after the day-to-day, the people, etc. And I was able to, sort of do the books from home. And I did go over several days a week because I was a 4-hour now commute away from my business. So I did try to get in caregivers, $26 an hour. They only worked 4 hours. So there was a time where I could no longer sustain that. I decided that I should be his primary caregiver. I did then find there was the point in time where I can't lose the business, even though it wasn't really making any profits or anything. It was just kind of holding its own there. I felt, okay, well, I can't keep up with living in Annapolis. I have to now sell the house. We'd only been there 4 years, so kind of lost out on that. We thought that was going to be our forever home, so we did put a little bit into improving some of those spaces, and those aren't ones that you recoup easily or quickly. So we lost a little bit there. Moving back, I had to then rent a home in in Cape May. Was then just challenged with how to go forward with caring for him and keeping things revolving. I did then contract with an elder care lawyer to help me through the process. Everyone kept sort of suggesting that I go into the Medicaid system for him. I was able to separate my half, his half, Well, he was eligible, but he wasn't, when he was actually able to take Medicaid. He passed 1 week before his start date of being on Medicaid.
So it took you a long time to get through the process in order to get approval for Medicaid.
A year to go through the process to get it all, geared up. that cost about $12,000. So it's all out of pocket. Nothing else is coming in except his, meager social and such. So, yeah, just kind of.
And if I can, I'd like to chime in with what Robert mentioned about this being a significant middle class crisis. You get squeezed in the middle. And, all of a sudden you start talking about Medicare and Medicaid, and then you start learning that depending on which state you reside in, the conditions of Medicare and Medicaid and how it will work or not work so well for you are going to be different based on your jurisdiction. And, in my case, I had what I thought were resources. I ultimately spent everything on taking care of my wife. I self-funded all of it and ended up with nothing. But as I began exploring my options, what I learned was in my particular state where we were residing of Montana, if I chose to accept services through the Medicaid system for my wife, the state would essentially run a meter, keeping track of how much they spent for my wife's care. And that would essentially be a debit. And when she passed away, they would then place a lien on my house for up to 50% of the equity to recoup that money. That was the condition in the state of Montana. I don't know how many other states there are that do it like that.
Well, I got a letter from Medicaid after my husband had passed saying, we know your husband has died, and so now we are going to put a lien on your property. He didn't take a red cent, and they just had lost track of where they were at. I was furious.
So I hear a lot of stories like this. I hear about people feeling like they have to spend down their earnings even qualify for Medicaid. And just to make the distinction for our audience, Medicare is provided for 65 and above. Medicaid can provide for things like in-home care that wouldn't be covered under Medicare. So people who are getting Medicare often need to supplement with Medicaid in order to get those extra services like in-home care that wouldn't be covered under Medicare. So just as the background to this. So, I mean, you two are really exemplifying why the system isn't really working to help people in the middle class and, in order to care for their loved ones and also plan for a retirement. So, Robert and Daphne, I mean, through your research and creating Spent, are there solutions on the horizon, or is it really just bad news? I mean, we all know that the amount of dementia cases are increasing rapidly, 3 times in the next few decades. So is there a solution that's being talked about out there?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to be all doom and gloom, but there really isn't a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of answers in the federal government level right now. There's a lot of, funding has been increased for Alzheimer's research, which is great. But I do think that we need to hold our legislators accountable and say, hey, listen, let's do something. What can we do to help these families? And it takes political will. I mean, it takes that, that wanting to help these folks pay for their care of their loved ones. I mean, that's where it comes down to.
Yeah, we're hoping that the film actually helps raise awareness so that people do think, okay, wait, we need to put policies into place that can protect people so that the family of the caregivers don't lose everything in the meantime when we're trying to care for people. But on the good note, I suppose, is that our economist Julie Sissimopoulos from USC, one of her points is that even if there's something that can just, it doesn't have to fully prevent the disease, but if it could postpone the onset of a disease, then people still aren't looking as having to pay for care for as long of a period of time. And plus, of course, then we have the added benefit of that person is still an engaged member of their family and their community.
And their caregiver is still a functioning part of society.
Able to work and stuff. Yeah. So I feel like that's part of her hopeful good news, is that you don't really need a home run to make a huge difference. We just need it to be a lot better, so that, perhaps people would die of something else before
yeah.
that.
We have a viewer who just commented, maybe we need to lobby Congress to include Alzheimer's coverage in Medicare instead of having to go outside. Wouldn't that be nice if it just was part of the package?
It really,
and I did get a little benefit from that. And also a doctor would come and do house calls. So I found that part of Medicare I was thankful for.
I think what we're doing right here is a critical first step.
The awareness.
People, generally speaking, are just fearful of this experience. And yet, as you've said, Deborah, the vast majority of us are going to face it at one time or another. We're either going to be a patient, or there's going to be somebody in our family or in our immediate circle that is going to be dealing with this. And getting the experience out and that inevitability, and trying to move people beyond just wanting to run away from it to let's talk about it. And accepting it. I think a lot of healthy things can come from that, including legislatively and politically. More people like us just talking about what the experience was like. And even though, Robyn and I have these, some semi-horrific sounding stories, we're here to say that it turned into a very positive experience in our lives, and you can come out on the other side and
be open to those possibilities.
Yeah. And the way that Robyn and I met in support groups online, that's a whole new thing that didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. We would not be here and would not know each other if it wasn't for social media and support groups online, where people can connect over these things. So I think that's where the groundswell starts.
I was just going to say, my last question to you was like ending on a positive note. This brought you two together, right? And so that's a beautiful thing, which is, as you talk to me from the lovely wine country in New Zealand, I think there's positives to the end of the story. So that's great. And I completely agree with you in terms of, we were talking about this earlier before we turned the video on, which is the importance of companionship with one another, like people going through the same thing and navigating together makes the experience much more tolerable for anyone impacted by dementia. So we're so grateful to you all for sharing this story. And, both to you, Robert and Daphne, for producing this documentary called Spent, The Hidden Cost of Dementia. You can download it on Vimeo. Is that right? We can include a link as well. And, it really is a heartfelt story. In fact, you featured Jeff Borgoff is one of our advisors at Being Patient. He's been instrumental and great in helping us here at Being Patient. And he's also featured in the documentary. And, we're really grateful to you for raising awareness around this issue. It's such an important one, and one that needs a lot of thought to happen now and not wait for any longer. So thank you, all of you, for joining us and sharing your stories with us. Hopefully more people can see the documentary and see your story too, Robyn. And thanks to all.
Thank you.
So Thank you. If you want more, if you want to see more about of this interview and you missed any of it, or we'll supply you with the link to the documentary, please visit beingpatient.com. Sign up for our newsletters, because that's when we're telling you when we are having talks and what the topics are. If you have suggestions for us, please email us at info@beingpatient.com. Tell us who you want to hear from, what you want to talk about. We're open to your suggestions. So thanks very much for watching.
It's wonderful.